Chapter 3. Sven smiled as he admired a golden pocket watch with a large ruby set in the center. The intricate carvings swirled around the red gem in strange fire-like patterns. It wasn't keeping time right now, but when Sven wound it up, it began ticking away in perfect working order. It was worth a fortune, and Callias knew that Sven had lived in squalor long enough. He moved quickly through the bedroom, pocketing several other trinkets he knew he could fence. The life of a burglar wasn't always glamorous, but after a haul like this, he planned on living like a young drunk noble for a few months. He stopped cold in his tracks as he heard the front door to the house open. He carefully moved back into the bedroom and eased the door shut as quietly as he could. The hinges betrayed him with a gentle squeak that sounded like thunder in his ears. Once the door was shut, he began frantically pacing around the room. "I don't get it," he thought to himself. "I watched him for weeks, and he never came home in the middle of the day, until now." Sven cursed his luck as he heard a female voice conversing with the man downstairs. "Just my luck," he thought. "He brings a floozy home for a roll on the day I decide to rob him." Just then, Sven's heart sank, and he felt his skin going cold. He was standing in the bedroom of a mage who had come home in the middle of the day with a companion. He knew he didn't have much time. Rushing to the window, he couldn't find any feasible way down when he heard the telltale groaning of the stairs. They were on their way up. Sven could feel his heart start to race as he dove into the closet, not thinking. The closet was large enough that he could fit, but if the mage opened it, there was nowhere to hide properly. "Blasted Callias!" Sven cursed as he tried to slow his breathing. The groaning was getting closer, and he heard the sound of the door hinges squeaking. Two voices immediately flooded the room. "Show me the dancing flames again," a female voice said, giggling slightly muffled through the door. Sven pulled the small knife he carried for protection, although he knew that this knife wouldn't stop most street thugs, let alone a mage. "What was I thinking listening to Rasp?" he thought. "Just one job, and we'll live like kings for over a month." Rasp's voice echoed in his mind. "Let me slip into something more comfortable," the female voice said as he heard the door to the privy shut. Sven could feel his heart thudding in his chest as his pulse raced. He struggled hard to keep his breathing quiet as he heard the man walking across the floor. The floorboards creaked with each step, growing louder. Sven crouched down awkwardly, holding the knife. The sad truth was, he had no idea how to use the thing beyond the obvious. The door began to open, and a horrifying slit of light flooded into the dark closet. Sven winced and launched himself with every ounce of strength he had left in his half-starved legs. He collided with something and frantically began stabbing when he felt a terrible scorching heat. He screamed out in pain, hands reflexively going to his eyes. He rolled away and began crawling toward the door. He heard the woman scream and slam the bathroom door shut. His face burned as he tried to open his eyes. Tears streamed from his eyes, stinging as they encountered burned flesh. He heard a terrible gurgling sound as the mage's head hit the floor. "I need to leave," he thought as he cracked his one good eye open as much as he could bear. That's when he saw a red glow that lit the room. Through his blurred vision, he thought he saw a gem. He knew that he should be running, but that gentle glow captivated him. As the glow held his gaze, he swore that he could feel the pain in his burned face fading. He reached out a shaking hand when he saw that his skin was as black as pitch. He held it up in front of his one good eye and vomited. The wrenching renewed his pain as if he was being burned all over again. After lying for several minutes, he saw that faint glow again. Turning his head, he reached for it, the pain lancing through his fingers as his grip tightened around the gem. He couldn't feel the stone in his hand because it was too burned. Sven stared at the gem when suddenly it melted into his burned hand. He felt a cold stream moving up his arm and into his chest. "I'm dying," he thought as the cold sucked into his heart, causing his whole body to shiver. The cold began to warm inside his chest when he felt his burns begin to itch. Sven screamed as he raked his fingernails across his burns, causing blood to pour from the wounds. As the pain grew, he forced his trembling hands to stop scratching when he noticed the pink skin on them. He stared in awe as the skin re-knit in front of his eyes. "Blessed Callius," he said as he ran his hands over the new pink skin. It was very sensitive and almost hurt to touch, but he couldn't stop rubbing his fingers over them when he put his hands to his face. The itching abruptly stopped, and a wave of nausea and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. "What is happening to me?" he thought, as he realized that his wounds had stopped healing. He crawled over to the bed and pulled himself up into it. All he could think about doing was sleeping. As sleep began to overtake him, he thought that he saw the door to the bathroom crack open, but at the moment he couldn't seem to muster the energy to care about anything. "Man, this is a nice bed," he thought as darkness crept into his vision. Sven awoke in a damp cell with a single torch outside of direct view. The stone looked muddy and red. It reminded him of the red rock north of the city. He coughed in the cool, damp air. Thin lines of water trickled down the stone walls, pooling in little cloudy puddles all around him. He could make out the red-brown rust that coated the iron bars of his cage. "Where am I?" he said, his voice raspy and dry. He heard something stir out of sight, casting a shadow across the far end of the cave near the torchlight. "Hello!" Sven tried to cry out, but his throat tightened, choking off the word as it came out of his mouth. Elongated shadows crept across the cave entrance, looming ominously. Sven could hear hushed whispers and pressed up against the wet, rusting bars of his cage. "Where am I?" Sven coughed at the shadows. "Who are you people?" The whispering died down, and several of the shadows moved out of view when a familiar woman strode around the corner. Sven recoiled back when he recognized the girl that the mage had brought home. She seemed terrified and was wringing her hands when Sven noticed another woman trailing behind her. I didn't mean to do anything," Sven started to explain. "Really, this is all just a huge mistake. I can't explain. Really, I can't. Please, you gotta understand," he said, as panic gnawed at his painfully empty stomach. "That's him. He has the gem," the woman said, voice trembling. "Go," the other woman said, and the frightened girl dashed out as fast as she was able. The woman leveled a flat gaze at him. Her stony glare brought a large lump up in his throat, and he tried to swallow. She made a motion for him to sit, which he did. "If you aim to live through the night, you'll need to do exactly what I say," she said in a tone that broke no argument. "My friends think that we'd be better off killing you," she said, cocking her head to the side. "Don't think you're worth the hassle." "But I didn't do anything," Sven started as the woman casually slipped a silver coin from her belt. The coin looked dark in the dim torchlight. The woman pulled a knife from her belt, slipping the blade over the coin so fast he thought he saw a spark. Sven stared at her questioningly. "Do you know what this is?" the woman asked as she held it up. Sven squinted before answering. "A silver crown." "Unfortunately, no, it isn't," she said, tossing the coin into his cell. It pinged as it bounced off the iron bars, sailing through the cage, before splashing into one of the puddles at Sven's feet. "What is this? You can't hold me here," Sven stammered, trying to sound confident. "Pick it up," the woman said, voice going cold. "I don't know what you think I did, but I can assure you. Pick it up," she repeated punctuating each word. Sven swallowed and looked down at the coin. It was hard to make out in the water. He looked back up at the woman and saw she had her knife out again. He'd heard stories of the tortures that awaited any citizen who harmed a mage. Mages were protected under city law, and the commoners were basically at the mercy of any whim they had. He started to speak again, but paused as he stared at the coin. He was overpowered with a curious feeling to pick it up. He bent down and reached his hands into the cold water. The second he touched the metal, a white-hot light lanced across his left eye. The pain forced him to cry out and fall back against the hard stone wall that lined his cell. He could feel warm blood flowing through his fingers as his body shook from the shock of it. "Pick it up." A voice came from right outside his cage. Sven jumped as he saw the woman standing in front of the bars to his cell. His whole body was shaking with fear now. You think I'm crazy or something?" Sven spat. "What in Callias's name did you do to me?" "It can't hurt you twice. You're going to want to listen. I don't like to repeat myself," she said, looming over him. The light behind her had difficulty illuminating her face. The effect made her look like some ghoulish nightmare. Sven found his hand moving frantically back and forth, searching for the coin. The second his fingers found it, he grabbed it so tight he threatened to push it through his hand. "I can keep them from killing you. You see, you need my help. Even now, they have trackers looking for you. The Necroluex doesn't take kindly to those who kill their mages, but you already knew that." Sven shivered and pressed his hand harder against his eye. The pain was starting to subside, and he felt terribly exhausted. It felt like he hadn't slept in a week. "You know it took us months to get close to Ramulel. Mages are watched very closely, and then you had to get greedy." She spat, tossing another coin into the cell. It bounced off 2 walls before splashing into a puddle. She stared at the coin, falling silent. The colour drained from Sven's face. That small silver coin was starting to look more dangerous than an angry red-tail viper. "But please, I didn't mean any harm. Please, I'll do anything you want. Just don't hurt me." Sven whimpered, staring at that coin. "A half an inch," she said, almost in disbelief. "1/2 inch to the left, and you would have missed his carotid artery. He could have recovered from the knife wounds, but even healers can only take so much." Sven felt dizzy, like he hadn't eaten enough. "But you would know that healing can recover burns, seeing as you grabbed Ramulel's gems." Sven's mind shot back to that faint red light. Suddenly, he could feel it all around him. He held his hands out in front of him. They weren't burned. He gaped at them as he remembered the smell of burning flesh. "You mean that I'm a mage?" Sven asked, feeling his eye. There was no wound, but he couldn't see out of it anymore. "You've been using your magic reflexively. New mages can't control their powers. We took you down here before you could start to berserk. Once you eat and rest well, let's just say things will get a little hot down here," she said, chuckling. "We've got all the trackers baffled. Ramulel was a known fire mage, and they have the city's fire marshals on high alert. They've now assumed that this was some noble family hired contract so that they could stop the berserk from happening." "A fire mage," Sven said as he held out his hand. He didn't know what he was doing, but he could feel something inside of himself straining to come out. His hand started to glow, and flames burst across the cell, bathing the caves in a bright light. Sven cried out and shot another blast that sizzled as it turned one of the puddles to steam. The woman leapt back away from the cage, just as a burst ignited the entire cell in flames. Sven couldn't see anything but blinding light all around him. He cried out, and he burned his cot to ash, and the bars of his cell began to glow with heat. "Help!" he cried out in panic, continuing to flood the cave with fire. "I can't stop!" he screamed. The woman dashed around the corner, and Sven could feel the intense heat all around himself. He began to choke when he realized that the flames were burning up all the oxygen in the room. He fell to his knees as black rings closed in around his vision. Gasping for air, he fell against the warm stone floor. The flames snuffed out as he lost consciousness. A strange silence filled the chamber as the woman walked back into the cave. The bars of the cell were glowing a dull red as the air began to dissipate the heat. She pulled out a small silver coin and rubbed it between her fingers when she heard a familiar voice. "You should kill him now, Siren. He's too dangerous." The familiar slurring speech hissed. The faint smell of bourbon floated in on the air. "We don't have anyone that can hold a gem. It could be years before we find someone." Siren said, not turning around. "If he can be controlled, then we can move years sooner." It was several moments before the other woman answered. So be it, but this will go my way." She hissed as she took a swig from her flask. "Put a street orphan in with him." Siren lifted her head. "He can't control it yet." "Then I suggest you teach him quickly," she said, walking out of the room. Siren pulled a silver coin from her belt and rolled it between her knuckles. The metal glowed brightly in her vision, casting strange shadows around the cave. Silver always glowed with a strange fluorescent light in her vision. "Ceres, help me," she whispered.